Thank you, Jonathan and Evelyn, and thank you to all of you. Good morning. It's really a pleasure for me to be here with all of you, and I want to echo what Jonathan said about the friendship that we have. I greatly appreciate the work that Jonathan does. I think he's one of the shining lights in the country in the catechetical ministry. You have a real gem here. And so you're very lucky to have that leadership, as well as Evelyn's leadership in adult faith formation. I'm from Chicago, and so I was telling the folks here at the table a couple months ago, after Evelyn invited me to come down, I just out of curiosity looked to see, well, how far is the drive? I'm in Evergreen Park, just southwest of Chicago. And so I looked up Lafayette. Evergreen Park to Lafayette. It's about 2 hours or so. I'm like, oh, I think I'll just drive there that morning. Yesterday I looked up on maps, I put in the address for this location, and it said 3 hours and 15 minutes. I'm like, what happened? I thought it was just drive me 2 hours. And then I realized I lose an hour driving out this way. So I'm thinking I have a 4 hour and 15 minute drive period. So I drove out last night to go halfway here, stopped in Rensselaer, stayed overnight there, and made the rest of the trek this morning. So it's nice to be here with all of you, and I'm glad I remembered that time change. I've traveled to Indiana before and shown up an hour late for a presentation. That's not fun to do, to walk into a room full of people who are waiting for you. So thank you so much for being here and for taking time out from your busy parish schedules to spend some time looking at adult faith formation. Let me just tell you a little bit about my experience and some of hopefully the wisdom that I can bring to this gathering to incite you to new strategies, new approaches, new ways of doing things. I will move around, so those of you hiding behind the pillar won't be in a blind spot the whole time. And hopefully I won't be standing under any speakers that'll make this feedback at all. I started my ministry almost between 35 and 40 years ago now. It was 1981. I started as a high school religion teacher, and I taught in the high school seminary in Chicago for 9 years. And I was there until the school closed, and so I thought I'd be a high school teacher my entire life, but God has a way of throwing curveballs. And it was during that time, though, that I had my first experiences in adult faith formation. One of the secretaries at the school asked me if I would come to her parish and do a presentation for Eucharistic ministers. And I thought, wow, this would be fun to talk to grown-ups instead of always talking to kids, even though if they were high school kids. So I did that, and I fell in love with it. Started teaching in the lay ministry program so that I could, and the diaconate program, because I just loved working with adults. I loved the interaction, I loved the experience that adults bring to the table. So that's the beginnings of my experience in adult faith formation. When I left parish ministry, high school ministry, I went into parish ministry. And so I became a parish pastoral associate at St. Mary of the Assumption Parish in the far southeast side of Chicago. It was a small parish, the small staff, just the pastor, me, and the secretary. And so I wore a lot of hats there. I was the director of religious education, the children's program, the director of adult formation, the director of liturgy, the director of the RCIA. I had great meetings with myself all the time. No disagreements at all. It was always wonderful. But many of you, I'm sure, do that as well, always, changing hats. And one of my favorite things was the adult formation. As much as I loved running the children's program, my favorite part of that program was working with the catechists. I loved working with the adults. My favorite thing overall in the parish was working in RCIA and working with those adults in that program, and then beginning an adult faith formation program. So that was my passion in the parish and we had to do that because a year before I got to that parish, its school was closed. And you know that when a parish loses a school, people think that's the end. It's the end of the world. We no longer can exist as a parish. So we had to go in there and convince people that a parish without a school can flourish. But the focus had to be on the grown-ups. How are we going to mobilize this army of grown-ups that we have here? I was in parish ministry for 7 years, perhaps would still be in it, but a new pastor came in and he had a different idea, and it didn't include me. And so I moved into diocesan ministry. So I went to the Archdiocese of Chicago's catechetical office and became the consultant for catechist formation. So once again, taking care of adult faith formation, for catechists. And so I went from taking care of 15 of my own catechists in the parish to taking care of 10,000 catechists in the Archdiocese of Chicago. And then 15 years ago, I got the invitation to join Loyola Press. And it's where I continue to be now as the National Consultant for Faith Formation. As Jonathan mentioned, I've written a number of books along the way, and I actually brought a number of them with me, and I have those set up in the lunchroom for display and for sale later on. So that's just a little bit of my background. I want to get an idea of who's here and who I'm speaking to. How many bishops do we have here? Raise your hand. Thank you, Bishop, for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to come and spend time with your good folks. How many pastors and associate pastors, please raise your hand. That's wonderful. So that was one of the things that Evelyn was telling me she was so excited about, is we have many pastors here today. And that's so important because that leadership, that tone is set at the top. And for adult faith formation to be a priority in the parish, it's going to have to be something that the pastor gets behind and says, this is where we're going. This is going to be a priority. How many deacons are here today? Raise your hand. Wonderful. Thank you for being here. How many, some of you will be raising your hand more than once now. How many pastoral associates do we have here? Is that what they call them in your diocese? In Chicago would do. Directors of religious education. How many are just on the pastoral staff of the parish? Raise your hand. Okay. How many are involved on a team, an adult faith formation team? Okay. Other. Wow, what are some of the other ministries or roles that you're fulfilling, or maybe you're just here as one of the parishioners? Just shout out. Are there any other ministries I'm missing?
RCIA.
RCIA. Thank you.
Family Life.
What was that last one?
Family Life Formation and Hispanic Ministry.
Hispanic Formation.
Evangelization.
Evangelization.
Hoping to start small.
Hoping to start adult faith formation. So some of you are here looking for a job. Looking to begin this and get this launched. I heard someone else here.
ELM students.
ELM, Ecclesial Lay Ministry?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Men's
You know your
discipleship.
acronyms, right?
Men's discipleship. Men's discipleship.
Men's discipleship. Okay. Fantastic. Well, thank you all. It's amazing to see all these different ministries taking place in the diocese. So, without further ado, let's jump into our work for today. What I'm going to do is set the tone with some very broad strokes this morning, but also some very specific ideas. I want to throw a lot of things at you so you can start munching on them and chewing on them at your table. And say, well, is that something we could do at our parish? Is that something we're interested in? Would our folks go for that? So broad strokes, but also some detail as well. I want to point out before we go any further a couple of mistakes we want to avoid making. The first mistake that we need to avoid making when it comes to adult faith formation, we need to avoid coming at this with an academic mentality. What kind of classes will we offer? We are not teaching a subject. We are facilitating an encounter with a person, Jesus Christ. There's a huge difference. A teacher of a subject is passing along information. A facilitator of an encounter is inviting you to meet someone who will transform you. So information is a part of adult faith formation, but it's more about transformation. If we were simply teaching a subject, we could simply say that our adult faith formation is a course, have everyone take the course, whether it's something you do online or a book. Just give everyone a book, have them read the book, take a quiz. If they pass the quiz, they're a good Catholic. You and I know that's not how we make disciples of Jesus Christ. There's a big difference between saying, let's use an example. Here's an example. I'm from Chicago, so we just had big news yesterday. One of our sports legends, Stan Mikita, passed away. Hockey player, Stan Mikita passed away. There's a big difference between me telling you about Stan Mikita or telling you I'd like to introduce you to Stan Mikita because I knew him. I knew him personally. And if he was still alive and you were a hockey fan and I said I can introduce you to Stan Mikita, you might jump out of your chair. This is probably not a hockey town, huh? But it's that notion of the difference between talking about someone and meeting someone in person. Bishop Robert Barron, who was originally from Chicago, is now out in Los Angeles, said, compare this to if you wanted to teach someone the love of the game of baseball. You wouldn't hand them a rule book. I love baseball, here's the rule book. Read the rules and you'll know all about baseball. You wouldn't hand them a history book about baseball. He says, what would you do? You'd play baseball with them. You'd invite them to encounter the game. You'd go outside on a nice summer day and you'd take a bat and a ball and a mitt and you'd hit the ball and run the bases and teach the love of the game. You encounter the game. He said that's how we invite people to encounter Jesus Christ. And yet in many ways our adult faith formation sometimes looks like handing people a rule book. Here, read this. Here, take this course, as though we're teaching a subject. So we're not going to minimize the importance of the information that we have to pass on. We have doctrine to pass on to people. But that, as Bishop Barron says, that comes after you've encountered the person. Mm-hmm. There has to be a reason why you're going to apply this doctrine to your life. And that doctrine flows from a relationship. Okay, so that's the first mistake we want to avoid. The second mistake we need to avoid is, and you've heard of this phrase before, the silo mentality. Poor folks here can't really see the images too much. And 4 silos up here. We sometimes approach our ministries this way, don't we? In our parishes. You know, this is catechesis is happening over here, and then we have our liturgical life, and we have our human concerns over here, and over here we have our parish life. And now it's good to be organized and to have people in charge of different responsibilities, but when we develop a silo mentality, that means that we're doing them without being in communication with one another. And rather than a silo mentality, we need to have this image of a symphony orchestra. All right, there are still sections, right? There's a wind section and a string section and a percussion section. But look at the image here. Instead of 4 separate silos, it's a symphony of people working together and playing together under the direction of the conductor, so our pastors and other leaders of our ministries. So this is an important image for us to have. Now, I stress this because I was in a conversation with someone just the other day about the importance of catechesis in recapturing the many young people who seem to be wandering away from the church. And I was trying to make the point that we can't just say it's catechesis alone. Catechesis has in many ways become kind of a whipping boy for all the problems in the church. Oh, it's the bad catechesis we had since the Second Vatican Council. Yeah, have we had some problems? Yeah. But to isolate one ministry without taking into consideration the whole symphony. You know, I said, you could have the greatest catechesis in the world, but if then you invite those people to come to Mass and it's a terrible experience, they're not coming back. Now, this person that I was engaged in this with, she said, well, but if you're well catechized, you can endure a bad Mass. And I said, why does liturgy get a free pass? I'll say this later on, I don't know if it's today or tomorrow on one of my slides. Good liturgy is good catechesis. The liturgy forms us. You know how we're told to invite people to come to Mass with us? I've done that twice in the last 2 years. Haven't seen those people since. Both times they ran screaming. I'm exaggerating. And I don't want to throw my parish under the bus, but there's some problems. One of them went as far as they asked me after, this is a relative of mine, went as far as they asked me after Mass, how do you put up with that? I said, what? Just the whole thing. And she's Catholic, she goes to Mass, she lives in another state. If we're going to invite people to experience good catechesis, it has to be the whole thing, okay? So we're going to take a holistic approach to this. We're not going to simply pull out catechesis and treat that like it's, you know, an appendage of the church. It's part of the whole approach to what it is we're called to do. How many of you have been to a symphony before? Raise your hand. Any kind of an orchestra. And you've heard them tune up at the beginning. Do you ever hear that? Which instrument sets the tone, do you know? The what?
Violin.
A violin?
Oboe.
Thank you. It can be. But typically it's the oboe. Now, that's not an important point for what we're making here. Whether it's the violin or the oboe, there is someone or an instrument that sets the tone for the rest of the orchestra. When it comes to adult faith formation, there is a form of catechesis in the parish that sets the tone, or should set the tone, for all the catechesis that happens, including the adult faith formation. Anyone want to take a guess which form of catechesis that takes place for adults in the parish? RCIA. The General Directory for Catechesis tells us that the model for all catechesis is the baptismal catechumenate. I heard that how many years ago when the GDC came out, and I was kind of blown away by it, but did not understand it. It took me about 20 years to figure out what that meant. Many people who saw that and said, oh, so the model for all catechesis should be the catechumenate. So they decided, okay, so I guess that means we need to have an inquiry period, a catechumenate period of purification and enlightenment, and then a mystagogy. That's not what's being talked about here. Many said, okay, I guess that means we need to have a rite of welcoming, you know, and these different rites. That's not what the point that's being made. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But the RCIA, the catechumenate, is like that oboe. It sets the tone for all of the catechesis. And I'm going to draw out 4 points for what that means for adult faith formation on the next slide. But before we get there, in the same paragraph, the GDC says, and catechesis for adults must be considered the chief form of catechesis in the parish. We have been paying lip service to this for too many years. Yes, adult faith formation is the chief form of catechesis. In most parishes, it's not. It's not even close. You're here today to change that. I hope you're here to change for that reason. If you're not, I'm challenging you to go back to your parish and to make that change happen. This is not to negate child formation. It's not to put child formation on the back burner. It's to make catechesis for adults primary. We are trying, if we're teaching children, we want them to grow into something. But that something has been lost. We don't know what an adult Catholic's supposed to look like these days. Many of our adult Catholics are walking around with no conception of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And so children, after they finish their formation in the 8th grade and get confirmed, they walk away from it because they don't see adult models. They don't know what they've been initiated into. They just figure, I've finished my 8 years. I graduated. And many of the adults feel the same way. I know a director of religious education in a parish that told me a story of 8th grade confirmation took place, and one of the confirmands was ill that evening and missed. And so the DRE called several days later to ask, how is the child doing? Child's better. And so the DRE started telling her where she could take the child for confirmation in the neighborhood. There's going to be some other confirmations taking place. You know what the mother said? It doesn't matter whether it was the mother or the father. Can't you just send the certificate? That's all it is. My child just graduated, just send the diploma. So this is the mindset that we have. Not that that child is initiated into a new way of life, but they're done. They finished. So we're going to be talking about, we need to change the way we think, the way we function, and so on, from top to bottom, okay? Now, what does it mean when we say that the RCIA, the catechumenate, is the model? I'm going to point out 4 things, and we'll stress those. And if you want to find this, it's in paragraph 75. How many of you are familiar with paragraph 75 of the RCIA? Okay, all of you, your homework is to read paragraph 75 of the Rite of Christian Initiation for adults, which I consider to be, and many people consider to be, one of the most important paragraphs in any church document. Why? Because it tells us what the church is supposed to look like and what catechesis and faith formation is supposed to look like. Okay? So, paragraph 75 tells us that formation that takes place in the RCIA is aimed at training catechumens in the Christian way of life, emphasizing 4 key areas. And let's use these to set our tone for today. The first key area, preparing them for participation in a suitable catechesis accommodated to the liturgical year. This is absolutely crucial for our adult faith formation. Again, if we take an academic approach, well, we'll offer 6 classes in the fall, 6 in the spring. It's like we have a fall semester and a spring semester and so on. That's not what we're about. It should be accommodated to the liturgical year. What's our adult faith formation going to look like for Advent? What's it going to look like for the Christmas season? What's it going to look like for ordinary time? What's it going to look like for the Lenten season, for the Easter season? It needs to be accommodated, connected, joined at the hip to our liturgical calendar. It needs to, Eucharist is we use these phrases, but we have to live them. We say Eucharist is source and summit. Well, that means that all of our catechesis must have the Eucharist as its source and summit. It has to be tied to the liturgical calendar. And so the paragraph goes on to say such formation is focused not simply on doctrine and dogmas, but is to be an immersion into the mystery of salvation. That means that our adult faith formation shouldn't look necessarily like a college course. It should have a liturgical feeling to it. In other words, when people gather for adult faith formation, do they engage in song, in silence, in scripture readings, in ritual gestures, and in ritual expressions? That's the Catholic way of doing things. We need to teach our adults a language of mystery. See, it says there, we want to immerse them in the mystery of salvation. The Catholic Church, we're experts on immersing people in mystery because we have a language of mystery. And that language of mystery is used primarily at Mass. Now we're going to do a little demonstration here to show you that you know this language already. Okay? For the next several minutes, I want you to think of what are some of the things that we do at Mass with our bodies, our arms, our hands, whatever, to express ourselves without using words. When you think of an example, raise your hand, I'll point at you and ask you to stand up and show us. So show and tell. So we're going to have a little discussion without using words. So I'm going to start with the easiest one, and then I'd like to see your examples.
Yeah.
You're a very talkative group. How many of you understood that conversation? We understand that language. We use that language at Mass. And then for some reason when we cross over from the church into the parish hall or parish building for catechesis, it's like we forget it. Take out your textbook. Let's open up a textbook. Let's read. Let's watch this video, etc., etc. The catechumenate teaches a language of mystery. All of our catechesis should do that. All of our catechesis, whenever people gather, are we communicating that way? Do we, when we have people gather for some kind of an adult faith formation, do we begin with a procession? and perhaps setting up a prayer center prayerfully, silently coming and putting down, enthroning the Bible, putting a cloth with the color of the liturgical season, and so on. This is not fluff. This is the Catholic way of entering into mystery. We recognize that who we are encountering cannot be summed up in words. This is a powerful language. Let me give an example. I'm just checking my time, not messages. Okay. When my dad passed away almost 20 years ago, last year, I believe, he had Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's not only robs you of your memory, but towards the end, it robs you of your vocabulary. Most people with Alzheimer's towards the end, they just don't talk anymore because they can't even recall words. So my dad was this little puppy that just sort of followed my mom around the last year of his life. So when he was in the hospital and the doctor said it's time to say goodbye, my wife and I took our kids, who were about 7 and 10 years old at the time, to say goodbye to Grandpa. And we got to the hospital room, and my mom said, "John, Joanne, and the kids are here," but there was no reaction, there was no response. He didn't look up, he didn't seem to respond in any way, but he was conscious. And so we talked to Mom, and we spent the whole time there chatting with Mom and keeping her company, keeping her spirits up. And then a priest friend dropped by and joined the conversation and chatted, and then as he was getting ready to leave, he says, "Can I lead us all in a prayer?" We said, "Thank you, Father." We gathered around my dad's bed, and the Father said, "In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit." What did my dad do?
Oh my goodness.
Made this herky-jerky sign of the cross. Alzheimer's could not steal the language of mystery from him. It was residing in a different part of his being somewhere. But those were his last words to me. So this is not fluff. This is not, I'm some kind of a liturgical, guy. I'm not a liturgist. I'm a catechist. The best catechists need to become liturgists. We need to understand a language of mystery. I'm going to pause after each one and invite you to talk. First is a large group. Thoughts, comments, insights, questions. Reactions.
Anything.
Very patient.
I think a way that liturgy and catechesis comes together is one that's really popular is the Mass in slow motion or the Mass explained, because I feel like some of the languages that we speak at Mass is kind of being lost. And so a lot of our parishioners don't know why we bow to the altar, why we genuflect to a tabernacle, and so they need to be explained in this language that has to be rediscovered by a lot of our Catholics.
Absolutely right. And in the early church, the thinking was introduce people to those ritual gestures and then have them ask questions. What did you do? Why did you do that? I remember when I was working in the RCIA, and one of our catechumens, so he had no experience with Catholic Church, but he was coming into it. And one of his first questions is, what is that thing you guys do at the Mass? It's like right before the Gospel. It's like you got your hands are doing some kind of thing. And we said, this is, and then we explained that to him. So he thought we were swatting flies, But you're absolutely right. We need to explain those things. And so if we do these things at every gathering, so an adult faith formation gathering, why do we not, at the beginning of that gathering, ask people, and let's pray tonight that during our Bible study, that God's Word will be and teach people how to do that. And someone's going to say, well, why are we doing that? Do you know what that means? And someone in a group will know it. And then it becomes a language that they carry with them. And the important thing to know is that this language of mystery tells a narrative. Every sign, every symbol tells a story. And ours is a story of 3 R's: rescue, restoration, and reassurance. That's what our salvation history is all about. That we are rescued, we are restored, and we are reassured. And so all of these symbols, all of these ritual actions bring us back into that narrative. That saving narrative. So this is a powerful language. Think about how it works, okay? How do signs and symbols work? It's really very simple, and it works on a very deep human level. Jonathan, I'm going to use you as an example. So you have, Jonathan has 8 beautiful children. My family, I come from a family of 9. Come on, get to work, Jonathan. So he has 8 beautiful children. You take the kids out and you're in the playground running around. One of them, do you have one that's like around 3 or 4 years old? Okay. One of them falls down, scrapes their knee, starts crying, comes running up to you or to your wife. What do you do?
Pick her up and hold her.
Pick her up and hold her.
Ask if she wants me to kiss the boo-boo, because it's
Thank you.
50-50 right now. But she wants me
Do you want me to kiss it and make it better? Yes. Do you kiss it and make it better?
Always.
Always. How many of you have done that in your life for a child? How many of you believe that makes it better? Now, I don't think any of you are saying that you think it heals the wound on a molecular level. But have you seen a child stop crying after their kiss? Why? Because they were in a narrative of joy and happiness. They fell down and saw blood. And they entered into a narrative of fear and pain. And kissing it and making it better brings them back into a narrative of rescue, restoration, reassurance. That's how signs and symbols work. So every time that we use that language of mystery, fathers and deacons, every time that you use this language at Mass, you're inviting people into a narrative of rescue, restoration, and reassurance. So this is a very powerful language. Let's move on, and then unless someone else wanted to speak. Yes?
I love the language metaphor, because after RCIA, a lot of people drop off. And so you're kind of walking, holding their hand, going to Mass.
Yeah.
And then Easter is like graduation. And then they don't have anyone to go to Mass with, or they don't have any knowledge of their narrative on their own. Because it's kind of like giving a man a fish rather than them to do it on their own. So the last 5 years or so, I've seen people drop off from RCA without you really knowing why they're active. But I love the language metaphor, because they just like learning Spanish or something else. You have to immerse yourself in it, or you have to immerse. You have to have a why. You have to have a why you say it.
Yeah. In adult faith formation, there needs to be something that those people in RCIA are being initiated into. And it's one of the sad things that very often when they're done, it's like, okay, goodbye, you're on your own. We should be shifting them into the next thing. And that's adult faith formation, shifting them into a small faith group, shifting them into a Bible sharing group, shifting them into some kind of an ongoing immersion. You know, the immersion should not stop. So what you're talking about here today and tomorrow is building an infrastructure, initiating people into an infrastructure that continues to immerse in the mystery. Yes.
Yeah, two quick examples. One is I lead an evangelistic group, and one of the men who had just come, I had him come to Mass. There's no time to explain all the things that were going on, but what he could do was he participated in all the movements. And that was his way of connecting with what we were doing.
Yeah.
The other thing is that when we invite people from the community into our group, people who are not Catholic, maybe not Christian at all, and when we have our discussions, we open discussions. It's many times for the first time a person's there, they won't say anything because it's all foreign and they're not really sure and they're listening. But our way of connecting with that person when they come in and how we greet them, the smile we have food, we go around, we'll tell stories, and the storytelling is part of the process. So.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about that tomorrow in my third section, and I know that our other presenter is going to be talking about a lot of these themes as he unfolds the first two steps. But yeah, we're going to talk about that storytelling. It's one of the things that we need to do is to equip adults to tell their story. And their story within the context of the story of salvation. So it's not just everyone going around, oh, let me tell you about my story. It's like, it's not about you, but it's about what God is doing in your life. So tell your story, but the main, each of us has a guest spot in the story of our own life. The main character in the story of our life is God. Okay? So let me tell you about what God has done in my life. So it's a story from my life, but it's a story about God. So that's powerful. Yes?
It reminds me of a book.
I'd like to do this since I can reach you.
I'm currently reading a book called The Parish is the Curriculum.
Yes.
And are you familiar with it?
Yes.
And the whole thing is, the whole parish is RCIA all the time. And how to set it up, and it's interesting.
Oh, it absolutely is, and it's a bit overwhelming too. I'm sure some of you are like, oh my goodness. Well, that's why we're here for a couple of days, okay? A lot of this needs to sink in, and we need to go back and chew on it. But the parish is the curriculum. What's the parish teaching? Okay? If I have time, I teach catechists to always over-plan. It's always better to have more than not enough. Boy, did I over-plan. I have like 46 slides for this presentation. I think I'm on slide 4. That's good. This is setting the foundation for it. So let's move on to what's another thing that the catechumenate models. It says, an introduction into the Christian way of life. It's an apprenticeship. I carry in my wallet my what used to be called pharmacy apprentice license. My dad was a pharmacist. My uncle was a pharmacist. My grandfather was a pharmacist. My great uncle was a pharmacist. My brother Jim is a pharmacist. My brother Ron is a pharmacy manager. His daughter's a pharmacist. And my nephew Eddie is a pharmacist. A lot of drugs in the family. Okay. I apprenticed. And I still keep that license. It's now called a technician's license. I renew my license every year, $25. Pharmacy apprentice, pharmacy technician, in case this gig doesn't work out, and I have something I can fall back on. Apprenticeship. We are apprenticed by other people. That's also another thing that RCIA does. When done properly, the RCIA has sponsors, not just people who show up on Holy Saturday, but people who walk through the whole program. Sponsors are the mentors. And there's an apprenticeship that's supposed to happen there. Our adult faith formation should consider that. How can we mentor? Are there ways that we can get, perhaps some of the more seasoned parishioners to team up, couple up with some of our younger people? Maybe older married couples team up with young newly married couples and apprentice them, mentor them, okay? So that it starts by saying it's an apprenticeship designed to introduce people to a life of prayer, bearing witness to the faith, centering their hopes on Christ, seeking supernatural inspiration in their deeds, and practicing love of neighbor. One of the things that I like to focus on this last one, practicing love of neighbor. every RCIA process should include in their schedule days, nights, or evenings when they go out and do service. Okay? We should be apprenticing them into a way of life, not just teaching them doctrine. So, I mean, it's good to have a schedule for the RCIA, a syllabus, so to speak, although I hate using that word because that's academic. But on that syllabus, there should be dates when you go to the soup kitchen with your catechumens and candidates. Because that's part of the apprenticeship. We're not just, this week we're going to teach sacraments, the next week we're going to teach scripture, the week after that we're going to teach morality. It's an introduction into a way of life. And so you say, and next Tuesday, instead of coming here for class, we're all going to meet at the soup kitchen. And when we get together there, we'll pray, we'll sit down and read a little scripture, then we're going to work for an hour at the soup kitchen, and then we'll sit and talk about that. That should be a constitutive part of the RCIA. It should also be a constitutive part of adult faith formation. I think we are missing huge opportunities when all we do is invite adults to classes instead of inviting them to experiences. I'm going to give you an example. So I've been on and off for many years a catechist in parishes around my home. 3 years ago, I was a 6th grade catechist at a parish where the DRE, the Director of Religious Ed, wanted every grade level to have the children involved in a service project at some point. And so we decided to have our 6th graders, we had 11 of them, prepare and serve a meal at the Ronald McDonald House. Are you familiar with Ronald McDonald Houses? People volunteer, prepare meals, and people who stay there have children with serious illnesses in the hospital, and it's far from home. They can't afford a hotel, so they can stay at Ronald McDonald House so they can visit their child all day. So we had the kids prepare the meal. It was a great experience for the children, but something very interesting happened. When the parents came to drop off the kids at Ronald McDonald House on that night, instead of bringing them to the parish for religious ed, half of the parents asked if they could come in and help. That never happened on any other night that I was teaching. On no other night did any parent say, "Can I come in and help teach the children?" But on the night that we were going to serve other people, half the parents said, "Can I come in and help?" Unfortunately, we were limited to the number of volunteers, so I had to turn them away. But I thought to myself, this is an entry point for adult faith formation. Our adults, our young adults especially, they want to help. They want to help other people. They're not particularly interested in coming to a class that you're going to teach about the meaning of the word consubstantial. Okay? Not that that's not important, but that's not what they're drawn to. That's something that should come later down the line. What should come first is something that flows from the heart. And so this way of life is something that we should really be thinking about. How is our adult faith formation connected to people going out and doing service to others? That's probably one of the most powerful ways that you can mobilize people and to get them responding. Let's do a couple more because we're coming up on lunch. I can hear my own stomach growling. So, the catechumenate invites people into an immersion into meaningful Catholic worship. And that worship does not always have to be the Mass. Okay? Liturgy of the Hours, other devotions of our church. This should also be part of our adult faith formation, is inviting people to experiences of prayer and worship. Again, not just teaching of doctrine, but the practice of our faith, which is prayer. I remind people all the time, especially catechists. I work with catechists like Jonathan does. the majority of the time. And catechists are under pressure to teach content. You know, these kids, they've got to know their content. And I get that, I understand that. But I tell them, I said, you know, you want to teach them our faith. Our faith has 4 pillars: creed, sacraments, morality, and prayer. Prayer is not icing on the cake. Prayer is not, little sprinkles to add on. It'd all be nice if we add in a little prayer. It's a pillar. It's one of the legs you're sitting on. Take away one of those legs, you all fall over. We all fall over. Inviting people into experiences of meaningful prayer and worship is good adult faith formation. And then unpacking it, as you said. But what did we just do? Okay, remember in the John 13 when Jesus washed the feet of his disciples without saying a word, except for that little exchange with Peter? And he sat down, what was the first thing he asked them? Do you understand what I have just done? And that's often what we need to do. Invite people to an experience of prayer that may be unfamiliar to them, and then when you're done, gather them together and say, do you understand what we just did? So we just had something that's called benediction. Do you understand what that was? Or we just did something called adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. Do you understand what that was? That we just sat there for 15 minutes? You know, was that just downtime? You know, do you understand? Let's unpack that. So think of ways to connect your adult faith formation to immersing people in experiences of meaningful worship. And then finally, participation in the church's mission. If our adult faith formation is truly an apprenticeship, that means that we should be giving these adults responsibilities to carry out. All right, they're not coming to us as students or pupils who have to wait until they're done to get a certificate. They're apprentices, and if you are a good mentor, that means that you give them the tool and you step aside and you watch them do it. Say, here's the electric saw. Now here's what you need to be careful of. Try cutting that piece of wood. Stand back. Okay, no, here's what you need to do. We need to be mobilizing people into the mission of the church, and especially in RCIA, we don't wait until Holy Saturday and then get them involved in things. They should be slowly being immersed into the parish way of life. And that should be the same for all of our adult faith formation. How are we inviting people to develop that outward focus? There's a very good book that is called Autopsy of Deceased Churches. Has anyone read the book or heard of it? I figured Jonathan had. Tom Rainer, Tom T-H-O-M, Rainer, R-A-I-N-E-R. Autopsy of Deceased Churches. And he's done studies of denominations, churches, etc. that have folded, collapsed, etc. He says they all have one thing in common. They all turned their focus inward. They all turned their focus inward on the experience of this little community here, while the world around them, the community, the neighborhood around them was changing. And we see stories like that, don't we? Maybe some of us even come from parishes where the people who go to church in that building don't look anything like the people who live around the church. That's a problem. That means that church has turned inward instead of going out and getting to know who are these new neighbors. You know, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so moved away. They used to be pillars of the parish. Oh, isn't that a shame? Well, who moved in? And why aren't we going out and meeting them? So evangelization, that outward thrust. So all of our adult faith formation is not just about filling our heads with, I know more about the Bible, or I know more about morality. It should be, and what do I do with this? How do I take this out to the world and try to transform the world, or help God transform the world? Let me see what my final point on this was. So that was, the whole idea here is that I want to give you a big picture of adult faith formation and using the catechumenate as a model, but then talking about, what are the ways that we have to approach our adult faith formation, and what are some of the thinkings that we need to bring to it. I believe it was Einstein who said that the definition of insanity is doing something the same way all the time and expecting different results. Right? We are at a time where we need to be figuring out how to think differently, because we've been doing the same things for a number of years and they're no longer working. They're no longer as effective as they once were. Many of us feel like we're spinning our wheels, don't we, in ministry, that we're working so hard and we just don't seem to be getting ahead. It's because so much in our culture and society has changed. And so we need to be developing new ways of thinking, new ways of functioning, new ways of approaching our faith formation. So let me stop there and give you the last 2 minutes to offer some more thoughts, questions, feedback that you have on what we've just talked about. Yes, sir.
In that last point, I think that sometimes we give, at the end of RCIA, people are given, well, here's how you can be involved. But what I see missing is that they don't always have a good connection of how that connects with the mission of the church.
Right.
Or how you can participate in the work that we do.
Yeah, and everything has to be tied to how does this connect to the mission of the church. So, if we're involving people in service, well, public schools do that too. Some kids who go to public schools are involved in service projects. They do it there to become good citizens. We do it to encounter Jesus Christ, which means that we need to reflect on it. We need to prepare and send people into it. And we need to connect it to Scripture, connect it to liturgy, connect it to the lives of the saints, pull on models who perform this ministry over the centuries, and then when we're done with it, to reflect back and say, so what happened? What happens when we brought those kids back from Ronald McDonald House? We asked them, so what was that experience like for you? The kids said some really wonderful things, and one of them, a 6th grade boy outside of Chicago. It was pretty neat to see the smiles on the parents' faces, because they're going through a pretty hard time. You helped put that smile there. That's called the corporal work of mercy, a spiritual work of mercy. So we reflect on it, and that's catechesis then. We're learning about what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it, and in doing it, we encounter Jesus Christ. Yes, sir.
So the thing I love about RCIA is it respects the conversional process in the person, in the human person. And so it's like we take them through the stages, and I think that you can apply that, because my specific area is children in junior high, but we do a lot of work with parents, obviously, and that's one of my passions, is really connecting with parents. And I think that a lot of times we approach catechesis in the church is we don't respect the conversional process and so much of the catechesis. It's almost like we're on a train and we're going 100 miles an hour and we have people sign up for something, come on, jump on the train.
Yeah.
And they're just not there yet. Mm-hmm. And so I think, I love the RCIA being the model, because it's always a reminder that people are at different stages. And so in the inquiry phase, it's a great time to introduce them to the person of Christ through the Scriptures, and you take it gently. You don't get into the heavy doctrine in the early part. But I think we can apply that in all our catechesis. One of the things I'll talk to the catechist about is, we can't jump into the classroom and say, okay, today I'm going to teach you, and then we start filling their heads with all this stuff. Yeah. We have to honor their humanity, and we have to help them discover those questions within themselves. That, because that's when we grow closer to the Lord, is when we're engaged in that question. But if we're not asking questions, there's no relationship going on.
Amen. You said that so very well, and that's one of the concerns that I have over the over-digitizing of catechesis. I think there are great resources that we can use online, on DVD. Heck, I've made them myself. But they should never replace the person of the catechist, because a video cannot ask the person questions. All right? And that is irreplaceable. And the person cannot ask questions of a video of a person on tape. And how many times in adult faith formation and RCIA and so on do one of the participants ask you a question and say, so, well, how do you do that? How do you practice that in your life? A good example that I'll give you, and this does not have a happy ending, this story, but when I was doing RCIA, an elderly couple came to inquiry, elderly African-American couple came and got along with everyone, and we were, oh, this is wonderful, and they were interested. And then one night, the woman, the wife, said, I want to ask you something. She opens up her purse and she pulls out a newspaper story that's old, crumpled, and folded up, and she unfolds it and hands it to me. And it's a story of a murder on the south side of Chicago, which we obviously have too many of, and this is 20 years ago. And she said, that's my son. My son was murdered. Am I supposed to forgive that person? Well, I talk about being put on a spot, in adult faith formation. But that was a profound moment where we were able to interact and take her where she was at. And gosh, I thought we did our best as a team to be, very pastoral and to understand her hurt and to say it's something that has to happen gradually and so on. But she never came back. She and her husband never came back, and I've always wondered why. And those things are out of our hands, but there's the fact that she was able to engage us. Maybe she took something home with her. Maybe that's all she wanted. Maybe she wasn't looking for the whole RCIA process. Maybe she just wanted to talk with some people who claimed to be followers of Jesus and wanted the chance to ask, am I supposed to do this for real? So this very human interaction. So yes, let's use digital resources, let's use DVDs, but never to replace a well-trained person, a well-formed person who is there and can interact with the people in our adult faith formation. All right, I've given you broad strokes, I've given you kind of a big picture. We've put the horse in front of the cart. If we're going to talk about adult faith formation, the church says it should be modeled after the catechumenate. And so that was my job, was to get you started and say, so now as we go forward, let's not forget that. Let's not fall back into, let's make classes, let's have a 6-week semester, and things like that. That we have to draw on these principles. And I saw many of you mightily taking notes on these 4 areas. And hopefully we will come back to those. And I get a chance to come back again tomorrow, as well as being here with you the rest of today. But I can't thank you enough for this, an opportunity to get you started. And hopefully I've set the stage for the direction that we want to go and the kind of thinking that we need to propel us as we go forth. Amen? Amen. Amen. Thank you very much.